Asinuvusele sinimukele masatla mahle lomhla ekseni ehlelweni Kusile Breakfast Show. Sethembeke ukuthi nivuka kahle nanomhla ekseni kungilesithathu for the 29th of December 2021. We are only 3 days away from 2022. Asasibukena ngumbiko losweti kule tempilo. Elangeni letolo kuhlele abantu labangu 1021 kwatfolakala ukuthi labangu 312 banawo umkhuhlane COVID-19. Sishiye abantu labasiphohlongo etolo kanti labasesibhedlela labelashwako bangu 98. Lasabaluleme sebangu 738 bese kuthi solo wabhotvuka lomkhuhlane bamfula sabawutfolile bangu 64,873 kanti lasabashiya emhlabeni bona bangu 1,292. Active cases ku 6,998 bese kuthi lasabagome ngalokuphelele bangu 295,221 bese kwenta 25.3% of total population. Kanti sisabuke dona nje tindzaba temkhuhlane COVID-19 live France limemeteleke ukuthi litawungeta imali yabonesi kakhulukati labo labasebenta ehlangothini lwe-intensive care unit imali langanga 100 euros njalo emholweni wabo kusukela ngenyanga yaBhimbidvwane eminyakeni lotawo. Kanti-ke uhulumende uvetile ukuthi lokhu kuzama kubakhuthaza ukuthi bachubeke basebente ngekudikhandla ikakhulukati njengoba bona basengotini kakhulu ngalokuthi maningi ama-patients lokho ukuthi bayawanaka mihla yonke lokho kubabeka ingotini ngokuthi bawuthole lo mkhuhlane lokuthi-ke bathi le mali ihlose ukuthi bakhuthathe ukuthi bachubeke basebente njengoba nema cases awo lomkhuhlane kakhulukati ihlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant libonakala linyuka eveni lase France. Kanti-ke umhlonishwa Mvunankulu kulela live uphindze wamemetela lenyathelo noma ke imigomo lemisha noma lesengetiwe yekuzama ukuqinisa imithetho yekwanza komkhuhlane i-COVID-19 kulela live. Bathi-ke kusukela ngenyanga yaBhimbidvwane next month bamfu batawuphoceleleka ukuthi basebentele emakhaya emalanga lamathathu liviki ikakhulukati labo labakhonako sebakuvalile ke ukuthi kube khona labadlako nalabanathako mangabe batawugibela emabhasi la ishasive ikakhulukati lawo lahamba ema long distances. Kanti lokunye labakuvedile nje ukuthi angeke kusaba nesiphithiphithi ikakhulukati kuma restaurants nema bars bamfu labafise kunatha tshwala kumele ukuthi bakwende lokho bahleli phasi kude kuyingayinga lokutabe khona. Lokunye labakuvedile ukuthi kutaba beteke i-curfew nge-New Year's Eve kanti nato tikolo titawuvula nakucala nje inyanga yaBhimbidvwane njengoba kuhleliwe. Asesithatha ikhefu nasibuya sibena itindzaba tethu tecala.
I do the most.
Watch local TV on the go with the Eswatini TV app for only 20 emalangeni. Come on. Do the most with Eswatini TV app. Download from Google Play Store or App Store.
We're good together. Everywhere you go, MTN.
Asipenze sinimukele ehlelweni Kusile Breakfast Show sikuvusele nawo losandza kusivulela. Libutfo lichubekile nekuhlakula emasimu ebukhosi njengoba itolo lihlakule kumazibeke. Libutfo lichubeke ngaphansi kwemigomo netimiso tekuvikela umkhuhlane COVID-19.
lacwebetelako avukelelo kwangetingwedi kuyawuhlakula ensimini yebukhosi kumazibeke nalamhla emajaha abekade aphume ngetinkhani kanti lokhu kulandzela i-order yembube yemhlaba silo inkosi Mswati wesithathu esibayeni ngesikhathi kusha lukhuni leyaphuma ngeliphimbo lendvuna yemajaha kuleli siko lelihle nalelemcokwa emajaha ngetichemetawo letehlukene akhombisa lisasasa nenjabulo kanti-ke njengoba kuba khona nengatsha uma kuhlakulwa iyasatakala kakhulu njengoba ilikusasa lelive ngako itawukhona kuchubeka nekugcina nekulondvolota lelisiko lelisalishelwa bobabe mkhulu.
Mfana ngosi semasimini siyahlakula senda emasiko lesawakhanda ngeke sibalahle sesekhona bayawulahleka kulabanye bawusala emva kwethu futhi siwenda ngenjabulo kuthi kana lesisi kumbe wendeni ngoba thina asikhulumi lesingadani nabo noma ukhona umuntu omlolo nenkulumo yakhe asigelelani nathi nesingemabutho thina imabutho kangala besimini agethi incwala ende lokho nalokho kwemabutho nje kuphela hayi lokunene angenelana lokunene ngamabutho futhi ngenjabulo uthi uyabona uziyabona awu khidile lamnyama
Ekubeni licethe kuhlakula libutho libese lichubekela esigodlweni elidzini kuyawuchitha injobo.
Amajaha kuhle majaha mkhulu uyabonakala nemandla niyafaka lokho lokudzingakalako lokho kuhamba nenhlonipho sikhumbule social distance majaha sitamnqoba number 4 nasani social distance diponyo tingesuka emlonyeni kusasa majaha ephondo ayatha
Etindzabeni kubika Pholile Maziya anethobiso Dlamini esigodlweni elidzini.
Inhlangano ye-John Nash Shongwe Foundation seyinikelele bantfu labadzala labadzingile kanye nalabo labakhubatekile labangetulu kwemakhulu lamatsatfu ngekudla imibhedze kanye netingubo kubala kulokunye likhuluma e-Divine Healing Ministries kaManzini ngesikhathi kwetfulwa letipho takhisimusi liphinile ndvunankhulu Themba Masuku litibophelele kokuthi litawukwesekela lenhlangano ngekunikela imali letinkhulungwane letimbili kanye nalokunye njalo ngemnyaka uma yenda lomsebenzi wekunikela labo labadzingile.
Labanye bebakhala tinyembe titenjabulo kulabanye injabulo beyibhalwe emehlweni kanti labanye bebabonga ngekuhlephula imave encwadzini lengcwele ngesikhathi batfola tipho letahlukene enhlanganweni i-John Nash Shongwe Foundation leholwa nguBishop Nash Shongwe we-Divine Healing Ministries kaManzini. Liphinlandvu nankulu Themba Masuku lona belisimenywa kulomsebenzi njengoba labazuzile bantfu labadzala kanye nalabo labakhubatekile lababukwe litiko lakhe. Masuku uncome umsebenzi lowentiwa ngilenhlangano.
Bishop has been a shining star. Banengi bantu abafuna ukukopa lo kwentawo wena wathi thine basitshela nabakhuluma nathi. Lokhu kusho kona ukuthi uluswayi loluvanga impilo bantfu babe khona bakhone kuguquka uphinze ukukhanya wena ngekwakho ngoba ureflecta impilo yaNkulunkulu. Bishop angibonge bonke labakusekela kule foundation nekuthi siyathandaza ukuthi babe baningi labatawengedeka basekele le foundation ngoba le foundation ayisiyo nje ukhona lo shito la ayisiyo nje yakho lena ngiyasezulwini le.
Bishop Neshonge uthi sivele singetulu kwemakhulu lamathathu sithole tipho letahlukene kuthi sikhone ukuthokozela emaholide akhisimusi.
Lo mqimbi nje wanamuhla lo usathe ngathi plus or minus 200,000 akusiye imadlana lincane la kunembhede lapha len 8 khona ke lesaba nika ngenyalo lembhede len 8 le Simon le foundation kunetingubo leting 60 tekulala kunempuphu la 10 kg le 450 kunengibayo naye sebaleni kama lenkosi ke manibonga lapha ke bekhaya amathapha basipene lingwa elingakhi leting 300 igama lenkosi ke manibonga.
Thapsile Simelane lokhulumele labo labazuzile ubonge kakhulu kulenhlangano.
Ngendlela lonakekela ngayo abantu labadzala. uNkulunkulu akakubusise, aphinza kubusise.
Bishop Neshonge uthi inhloso yalenhlangano ukuqinisekisa ukuthi abantu labadzala bayanakekeleka ngenhloso yekwelekelela uhulumende ukuqinisekisa inhlala kahle yabo. Edinzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Nelson Dlangamandla nginambongwa Dube kaManzini.
Kanti ngakulobonye liphilani vunankulu Themba Masuku lithi badali abasonzede abantu ababo tvodane nabo babanike eteluleko letingito babachushise ngempilo kude kuphele kushiswa kwempahla yahulumende kanye neyesive. Liphilani vunankulu bekukhuluma ngesikhathi kumukeliswa bogogo nabamkhulu ngetipho esomveni le Divine Healing Ministries.
Kungaboni ngasolinye kwetinhlangothi letithite sekholele kwekuthi kube nemsindvo yeveni kubulawe impahla yesive kanye naleyo yahulumende. Liphilani vunankulu Themba Masuku liyawekhuta lomkhuba losolo uchubeka yeveni.
Lalaba bakhweshelako bakhweshela abantu abadzala kungako sebahamba bajikjele manje esitaladini ngoba le value lefanele ukuthi bayithole kulabatali bababalekele. Kungako kumcoka nasisehleti thina sibadzala sikhumbule ukuthi umthetho osisekelo wale live lo khona lo lethe bo free primary education lo lethe ngingakubala kubenganani lo sekwaba khona kuthiwa ngemalungelo kwentiwa kunabantu abadzala nonke etikhulwini tenu nanikhuluma nikhulumela live. Mhlambe lamhla sekufika esigaba lapha sekukhona lokufuneka kulungiswe kepha kwakungalungiswa nakadzeni ngekushiswa anything. Naw tawukhumbula ukuthi emaswati nasahomtela inkosi bebita sibaya ithi ake uphume mntwana inkosi masithela uyowuva uthathi nemaswati ngitowalungisela.
Masuku uthi uhulumende utibophelele ukuthi kukhulunyiswane kuboniswane nesive uma kunetinto lokungavunyelwana kuto. Edinzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Nelson Dlangamandla nginambongwa Dube kaManzini.
Mapalane lomkhulu etiko letemisebenzi lemikhulu nekutfutsa Thulane Mkhaliphi uthi emalangeni langemashumi lamathathu kutawube kuphelile kulungiswa kumgwaqo lolimele inkomazi nawubheka esipiki. Mkhaliphi uthi ingoti ikontlaki seyivele ucalile umsebenzi wekulungisa lomgwaqo.
Alesine evikini leliphelile litiko letemisebenzi lemkhulu nekutfutsa labemetela kuvukwa kwemigwaqo iMR1 nawutofika nje ebhloheni lasenkomazi emgwaqweni osuka emoshani uye kumathamo. Kuthe ngalesibili wasuka umsebenzi wekulungiswa lomgwaqo kanye nelibhloho lelalimala nawubheka kumaguga. Mapalane lomkhulu etiko letemisebenzi lemkhulu nekutfutsa Thulane Mkhaliphi uyachaza.
Sesicalile ke siyasebenza kulungiswa lo mgwaqo loyo ukuthi nje
ngalama holiday yakhisimusi ibandla lakithi lalabo engineer lonke nje ema-holiday besola khona lena funa kubonakala indlela ukuthi kungalungiswa njani ikontraki seyisesayithini baqalile nje basebenza itolo nalamuhla vele sekuyasetshenzwa sitawucela-ke ukuthi again nesilo kusasetshenzwa bamane futhi bakasibeketelele ngoba kutabe kungahambeki kahle ngendlela lejayelekile kepha-ke vele sicelile kulabe contract lokuthi abaphamise kakhulu umsebenzi ube uphelile lokungenani angapheli emalanga 30 inyanga ukuthi bese kuphele kahle bakhona abantu ngosiphindze bahambe kalula akusiye umsebenzi lolula loya umsebenzi ucishe lolukhulu kakhulu one lokuthi uku-highway kwesibili ukuthi vele usenzaweni ekhwacele kakhulu njengoba nibonile nje lapha ukuthi kuneligitsi lelikhulu ngala nangala kufuna ukuthi kulungiswe umgwaqo lomunye lokutawukhanza ukuthi utawuhamba eceleni kusakhiwa ngala.
Mkhaliphi uchubeka ukuchaza nangetinhlelo taleli tiko tekulungisa imigwaqo velonke.
Sitawuhamba sikhulumisane nebaholi labakhona emimangweni bo-MP sikhulumisane netinkundla sikhulumisane nabo bo-RA ukuthi noma ngabe sinako lokuncane sisale si-prioritize ukuthi ngikuphile lapha kubonakala khona ukuthi vele akusahambe khona kakhulu manje siphuthume khona vele basithumela lokho labasithumele ukuthi sisukume sihambe sikusebenze sicela nje ukuthi bantu ngoba vele bese kuselemva kakhulu basibeketelelele kakhulu nje.
Enkulumeni ekuphetha umnyaka Ndvunankulu welive Cleopas Dlamini waveta ukuthi uhulumende solungisa amabhuloho lange-27 lalinyedwa ngizamcolo Cyclone Eloise kani imali lese isetshenzisiwe ngo-29 million emalangeni kulungisa takhiwo letalinyadwa ngilozamcolo Tindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla nginavuma inkosi inzinisa sisenkomazi.
Usabambe kuba ngumabhalanelo omkhulu ehhovisini leliphini Ndvunankulu Kusile Dlamini uthi leli hhovisi lihlose ukuthi ngenyanga yeNdlovulenkhulu eminyakeni lotako libe selicalile kusebenta likhaya leli tohlala abantu labakhulile kanye nalabadzala labakhubatekile kanye nalabadzala emankayane. Dlamini uthi isigaba sekucala sekwakhiwa kwaleli khaya sesaphela.
Lelikhaya labahlubulile lehlukene kabili kunalapho kutawuhlala khona abantu labadzala bese kuba nendzawo lesakhiwa lapho kutawuhlala khona abantu labakhubatekile. Losabambe kuba ngumabhalelo omkhulu ehhovisini leliphini Ndvunankulu Kusile Dlamini uyachaza ukuthi bekusolo kubambephi ukuthi lelikhaya lingasebenti.
Lihhovisi nekubambisana nalesisebenzisana nabo sisakha luhlaka cishe lengilona seliphelile lelingilona lelitasisita ukuthi lesimthatha simfaka lapha kuti abahlobo lemuntu lesakhiwo ke mbukele ekhaya sitawuthatha abantu labange-48 sidindlu letisiphohlongo indlu eyinye itawuhlala abantu labasithupha. Silihhovisi ke nekubambisana nelitiko letemcashwa tisebenzi basiniketile ama-positions langasebenta kulesakhiwo siyakhulumisana netiko letempilo ngokuthi labo labatawusebenta khona kufanele kube bantu labanjani. Siyethemba ukuthi nakuphela lomnyaka wetimali tahulumende March 2022 sitabe sesisebenta lesakhiwo konke lokufanele ngakukhona endzaweni sekuhlelekile nalabantu lekufuna bangene babe sebahlala khona.
Lesakhiwo saphela kwakhiwa nakusuka lomnyaka losetulu kanti nelitiko letisebenti embuso bese livumile ukuthi kuchashwe abantu labatawusebenta kuleli khaya. Tindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla isemankayane.
Imvotsa yelikhaya imile yabukela yababete nemandla ekwenta lutho ngesikhathi emajaha lamathatfu alumeka likhaya layo ngemlilo endzaweni yaselangeni kusa kwangemsombuluko. Lendvotsa ithi bekumele ngabe nayo ishe yangcongca kulomlilo kodwa isenzise ukuthi kukhona lo wamshayela licingo wamluma indlebe ukuthi kunamajaha lafunge agomela ukuthi atawuhlasela leli khaya. Lo mlilo ushise konke kwasala impahla letisemtimbeni kuphela.
Liviki lokugcina leminyaka wa-2021 alikabi nguleli cala kahle emndenini wakakubheka endzaweni yaselangeni njengoba kube nebantfu labashisa likhaya labo. Mduduzi kubheka longubabe waleli khaya uthi wema embonisweni wabukela abantu bashisa likhaya lakhe njengoba kude bekangakwenda. Kubheka uthi bamshisela nje basola ukuthi waba nesandla ekubulaweni kwesihlobo sakhe noko umthetho wafika wamhlenga ukuthi akazange abanesandla kulobucala kodwa lakwenda uzama kulamula.
Inhlahla lehle nabantu ngishisa bakhanza ukuthi kuba nelijale lingivedela ukuthi angibaleke bathi bayeda nakhona bathi uyiva emashingweni cha ngiyabaleka ngiyohlala embonisweni ngiyalinza kuze kushaya 1 befika bacala kamakhelwane babulala amafastile base bayaconza la khaya bayashisa bacala bashata ivalo babhidlita babulala amafastile base kwasegcina kusuka umlilo.
Kubheka uthi unebantwana labane lomncane uneminyaka noma ke unenyanga yinye kanti lomdzala uneminyaka leli14 14. Uthi bantwana namake wabo wababhacisa kadzeni nabacala kubasongela ngekubabulala.
Ngacela ukuthi nebantu Nkosi yami siveni umane ngibusele nathi inzalo umane ngikhona ukufihla inhloko liyana angisebenza nganalutho lebantwana labangifuwa solo nabo babaleka ngalesikhathi bafuna kubashisa ngisejele bahamba bangaphathi lutho impahla tonke tishile nyalo bathumele abantu abakhe bashisile kepha sengithembene mango mhlawumbe utangibonela.
Kubheka uthi utiphilisa ngekuthengisa tilimo netimfuyo. Uthi nyalo sewulala emitini yebantfu labehlukene onke malanga njengobe unekwesaba ukuthi kuhlala kumuntu munye kungamdonsela imandi noma kungadonsela loyo muntu emandi ngemsele. Konke lobe ukhona kulendlu leshile kusele kungumlotha lokufaka ekhatsi timpahla tebantfwana. Labafise kusita lomndeni bangashayela inombolo lethi 76809822 76809822. Tizabeni Eswatini TV kubika Themkosi Mavimbela elangeni.
Njengaloku tichubeka nekukhula tinombolo tebantfu lababulawa umkhuhlane COVID-19 litiko letemphilo likutsata emaswati ukuthi akativikele kuwo. Umcondzisi wetiko letemphilo Dr. Vusi Makagula uthi linyenti lebantfu labasishiye emhlabeni ngulabangakawujoveli lo mkhuhlane.
Emalangeni lamatsatfu lengcile babelishumi bantu labashile emhlabeni ngenxa yemkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Umcondzisi wetiko letemphilo Dr. Vusi Makagula uthi litiko liyakhatsateka ngalokushonayo labantfu.
Kulabantu abaningi labashonile leyo 12 I think labaningi babo bebangakajova. Labaningi babo bancane bangaphansi kweminyaka lengu-40. Sibe nawo futhi nalababili labashonile baneminyaka between 12 na 19. So singathi sathi ama-projections ethu akhona siyawasebenzisa siyawabuka but singathi sathi sitasifanele yini naleso sakubona ngesikhathi lesuka lesikhathi lomnyaka lophelile sisehleli sisakubukile konke lokho ama-projections njengoba sengishito vele akhona siyawena siyadinga ukuthi sisuka kukhisimusi kule weekend besijayiva vele silatha imbuti senta konke lokwentwayo siyathi futhi nangalesihlanu ukuthi awuphinzeka kona lokho. Sengulumende-ke silitiko letemphilo sibuka kona nje siyacwayisa nje kakhulu ukuthi asingabe sesijabula sica kakhulu sesikhohlwa lokho lesikubona ukuthi kusisitile kugeza tandla sipho nemali lehambako kucekelana noma sijabulela sicekelane nje impela kubonakala ukuthi sicekile sikhweshile si-avoid enzayo leti crowded sikhweshe nje kuloko ngibona kuphela kungasisita. Omicron ikhona i-Omicron siyayibona ukuthi ingathi vena seyenyusa inombolo debantu labashonako but asingatheli asingethuki asende lokho lesicwayiswa kona siyethemba ukuthi abangcono.
Akulokunye Dr. Makagula ugcizelela ukuthi eMaswati akajovele lo mkhuhlane kutata uphepha Magagula unike eMaswati idolocina kusihliko letempilo lime ngemumo kulwa nalo mkhuhlane. Tindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla ngisembabane.
Kutemidlalo licembu levovovo likhale phansi kwekuqala emidlalweni we-MTN Premier League nalishaywa yiManzini Wanderers ngemagoli lamathathu kulamabili. Ivovovo beyidlala umdlalo wekuqala solelahlekelwe ngumphathi wayo Sipho Bhembe loshone evikini leliphelile.
Uthi nakuqala yona-ke umnyaka losetulo webhola we-2021-2022 kwaba tinkulumo-ke emkhathini welicembu lemanzini Wanderers nelicembu levovovo kwasuka abaphathi kumanzini Wanderers betakhona kuvovovo kwasuka nebadlali betakhona kuvovovo. Lamacembu-ke namuhla adibene kwekuqala kodwa-ke lamacembu adibana kwekuqala nje licembu levovovo lahlekelwe ngumphathi walo evikini leliphelile Sipho Bhembe labekade wangelatsekla. Kodwa-ke lokho umceceshi akakuboni ngathi kubaphatanisile badlala emidlalweni namuhla njengoba bakhale phasi kumanzini Wanderers ngamagoli lamathathu kulamabili.
I think we should be men enough. They should be strong. It happens in football. You cannot win all of them. Is how we regroup, and you just need to be strong.
Kulo mdlalo-ke ilicembu levovovo libonakale liba nemandla ekuqaleni njengoba lishaya igoli kuqala yase yabuya yona-ke emanzini Wanderers ivalela lamathathu kodwa-ke umceceshi wemanzini Wanderers ubona ngathi ngabe bashaya amagoli amaningi nalaba bawashayile namuhla.
Kusho ukuthi ivovovo sitwe ngiloko ukuthi kunebantu abasuka la kithi abasimotivate ukuthi nabadlathini manje vele bekushidiwe ukuthi namuhla emadoda hayi laba.
Lo mdlalo wemanzini Wanderers kanye nevovovo akusiwo kumdlalo lobodlalwa namhla kuphela njengoba licembu leRoyal Leopard likhombisa kuba nemandla njengoba lishaye imbama yemagoli lawina ngamagoli asihlanu ecanzeni nadlala neThambuti. Imbabana Highlanders incobile kuMalandi Chiefs ngamagoli lamabili ecanzeni kwase kuthi iMilling Hotspurs yona yanqoba kuRangers. Lobikele umsakade Eswatini TV kutemidlalo ngilinda Dlamini naphathizo Msibi ePrince of Wales eMbabane.
27 minutes past 7 namhla ekseni ngalejo temidlalo siyadiphetha tindzaba tetfu asibahlala timakethe sitabuya sichubeke nehlelo.
Nziki skim sami mayingiyabonga kungadisa ngemvo lebengaze ibe yimfihlo kulomunye umuntu ungadise ngesimo sakho sekuphila ne-HIV. Mngani wami yati ukuthi ngimi nawe waya
mngani wami ukwende kwaba melula kakhulu ukubhokokela ngiyati ukuthi soze wangihlamula bunguwe bakho uyangikhulula kakhulu emoyeni wami. Ngiyabonga girl ungikhulula kakhulu kwathi ukuthi wena uyahlala unami njalo njalo.
Girl sisonke always kuphila ne-HIV angeke kulushintshe nakancane lithambo lwami ngayo. Mnganami yati ukuthi ngimi nawe sonke isikhathi.
Kuva kabandi shayela 1212.
As we celebrate the season of family, friendship and love, the Eswatini TV Board of Directors, Management and Staff hereby wish all our esteemed viewers, partners and nation at large an exciting, peaceful and safe festive season. Let joy be your gift at Christmas, and may faith, hope and love be your treasures in the new year. We at Eswatini TV wish you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2022.
Sibenze sinimukele babukeli lomhlahlelweni Kusile Breakfast Show sibangakhulu ukuthola nihlelisene nathi asikuvusele nawe lo sanza kusivulela sisizele nje ngemalanga lamathathu kuphela ukuthi singene eminyakeni wa 2022 sibangakhulu ukuthi nivuke nathi lomhla ekseni lesikhathanyalo sitabuka tindzaba lethamba embili kulamanye emave kanti sitaqala eveni laseBrazil njengoba kuchubeka timvula letinemandla lapha kulela live ema floods kubika ukuthi sekushone abantu labangedulu kwemashumi lamabili.
Much of the neighborhood is still submerged in water as intermittent rain continues. Some people had to rush out of their homes in the middle of the night.
Surpresa, né? O pessoal estava todo dormindo e quando a gente deu pro ferro, já tinha invadido a casa. Só deu tempo de sair as pessoas da casa. Felizmente, não tivemos vítimas fatais, né?
Com quase 1,80 m de altura em algumas casas aqui.
About 200 people were rescued by boats across 3 towns. The heavy currents of swollen Cachoeira River made rescue operations more difficult.
Com esse volume de água, ficou difícil, inclusive, a manobrabilidade com os jet skis, para, digamos assim, não oferecer risco àquele que está pilotando, nem à vítima que está sendo socorrida.
Flooding has continued on and off for weeks, causing what the state governor has declared the worst disaster in Bahia's history. Record rains followed a long drought, affecting livelihoods in the state of 15 million inhabitants. The situation worsened over Christmas after a pair of dams gave way, sending residents scrambling for higher ground. Local media say authorities are monitoring an additional 10 dams for any signs they may collapse. 72 municipalities across Bahia are now in a state of emergency.
Selo siyachubeka netindzaba tetfu kanti sitawo eveni laseSomalia kungevani emkhathini kwamengameli kanye nandvunankulu kulela live lesekuchubeke iminyaka kanti lokhu sekuphocelelwe ukuthi imengameli amise emsebentini indvunankulu kodwa indvunankulu ubonakale achubeka nemsebenzi wakhe.
Hours after his suspension, Somalian Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble denounced a deliberate coup attempt by the president and called on the military to remain loyal to him.
waxaan farayaa dhammaan ciidamada qalabka sida in ay si toos ah uga amar qaataan xukuumadda xafiiska ra'iisul wasaaraha.
It was the latest escalation in an ongoing dispute between Somalia's two most powerful figures. President Mohamed Abdullahi had already suspended his prime minister in September, and while the two men looked to have buried the hatchet a month later as they issued a joint call for elections to move ahead, the peace didn't last for long. A fresh row erupted on Saturday after the president called Roble incompetent and withdrew his mandate to organize the elections. The prime minister then accused the president of sabotaging the electoral process and was suspended a day later. In the capital, Mogadishu, residents worried over a rivalry that threatens to further derail a long-awaited presidential poll.
dhibaatooyinka ugu badan hadda waxa ku dhacaya rayidka waa waxaan iskalifayn iska qabsiga madaxda ay ku imaadaa xilliga kala guurka ku imaadaa marka waxa ka codsanaynaa madaxda dalka ugu sareysa iyo nidaamka dawliga in lagu soo celiyo.
10 months after the end of Mohamed Abdullahi's mandate, Somalia's regional leaders still haven't been able to agree on a date for the next elections, and the latest political row is unlikely to help the country move out of this electoral limbo.
Manje kutawuthina kucala inyanga yapimbidvwana live leMelika nelive leRussia litawubamba umhlangano lapho kutawube ukuthi ngidva khona tindzaba tekuphepha esifundzeni sase-Europe.
Near Kiev, these Ukrainian reserve soldiers fire fake rounds at mock Russian troops. They want to send a clear message to Russia, who is accused of plotting to invade Ukraine.
Складно сказати, я в 8-й рік живу з думкою про те, що поки ми не дамо Російській Федерації по морді добре, вони від нас не відчепляться. Тому що вони завжди добивають слабких. Якщо ми не будемо чинити спротив, то ця навала буде нас довго ще тримати.
Russia denies any ill intent toward their neighbor, despite amassing nearly 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border in recent weeks. On Saturday, 10,000 Russian servicemen were reportedly recalled. The Kremlin has openly lobbied against any expansion of NATO to Ukraine or former Soviet countries. Given the tension between the U.S. and Russia, the stakes are high for next month's scheduled talks. On January 10th, representatives from Washington and Moscow are planning to meet over nuclear arms control treaties. Also likely on the agenda, rising tensions along Russia's border with Ukraine.
When we sit down to talk, Russia can put its concerns on the table, and we will put our concerns on the table with Russia's activities as well.
2 days after the U.S.-Russia talks, Moscow will speak with NATO representatives and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a sign that Washington and its allies are trying every avenue to bring about diplomatic resolutions to the Moscow-Ukraine border.
Kanti-ke kulandzela kucinzeteleka lokusuka khona ka-EU kanye nasemelika, mengameli wase-Poland sowuvume ukuthi kusebente umthetho lowengamele tebetindzaba media law kokuthi ivale umsakato i-news channel TVN 24 yasemelika.
Odmawiam podpisania nowelizacji ustawy o radiofonii i telewizji i
A veto no one expected from the Polish president, as Andrzej Duda blocks the passage of a controversial law over control of the media. Critics had called it an attempt to silence opposition, though it was rushed through parliament earlier in December. It had been a project of Poland's right-wing nationalist government of the same Law and Justice party that elected Duda as an ally. However, while saying he agreed with it in principle, the Polish head of state asserted it would have threatened existing accords over international investment.
A zawarliśmy umowę, to trzeba tej umowy dotrzymać. Jeżeli my nie będziemy dotrzymywali umów, to inni z nami umów też nie będą dotrzymywali.
Duda was referring to a US-Polish agreement signed in 1990 over commercial and economic relations. Indeed, Washington had urged him to use his veto, not just against that backdrop, but one of fierce domestic opposition to the law, with demonstrators turning out to defend against what they saw as an attack on freedom of expression. The text would have prevented companies based outside the European Economic Area from holding a controlling stake in Polish media firms, something widely seen as targeting the independent news channel TVN 24, owned by US parent firm Discovery, and considered critical of the government. The Law and Justice Party already controls public television and swathes of Poland's regional press. Following its election in 2015, the party's overseen Poland's plunge at the World Press Freedom Index by 46 places to 64th.
Kanti-ke experts democracy sewavete ukuthi ilive lasemelika alisabona njengesibonelo semave labuketona tindzaba democracy.
The world was shocked when supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, to prevent Congress from certifying President Joe Biden's election victory. The scenes of mayhem inside the symbol of American democracy had a powerful negative impact, experts say, at a time when numerous studies show democracy in decline around the world.
Why is Brazil going backward in democracy as it is at the same time that India is going backward? Is the fact that Brazil going backward have any relationship to what's happening in Turkey or India or the United States? In general, a lot of different countries are struggling at the same time, but often for their own reasons. Now, there is a general feeling in many democracies that citizens are unhappy with what the government's been doing for them, and they're willing to support candidates who offer to disrupt the system.
A study by the Pew Research Center shows that only 17% of people in surveyed countries said U.S. democracy is worth emulating. That compares to 57% who believe it used to be a good example.
And one of the things that we see in our surveys is that people have real concerns about racial and ethnic discrimination in the United States. Big majority say it's either a very or somewhat serious problem. And for the most part, big majority say it's a very serious problem in the United States.
Deep divisions over race and the role of government have existed in the U.S. ever since its founding. While polarization remains, Views of the U.S. internationally did improve dramatically when Joe Biden was elected to succeed Donald Trump, according to Pew's Richard White.
People liked Biden better than Trump. They liked his policies better than Trump. They liked to see the United States engage with the rest of the world. They like a more multilateralist approach to foreign policy from the United States. So when Biden did things like rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, rejoining the WHO, those kind of policies were embraced by people in other nations.
Democracy experts say the U.S. needs to look at the root causes of people's grievances if they want to reverse the global decline in democracy.
Globally, I would say that, as the United States looks at other countries that are struggling with democracy, it needs to think about why are citizens so angry? What makes them so unhappy? What makes them vulnerable to supporting leaders who are disruptive and anti-democratic in many cases? If they're very angry about corruption, then the United States should really press hard to help them fight corruption. If they're really angry about economic marginalization, like some people are in Peru or Chile, then you need to help them with that.
Experts say efforts to defend democracy, at home and abroad, will continue to be a priority and a challenge for President Biden and his administration in 2022 and beyond.
Solo siyaqhubeka netindzaba letibuya ngaphandle kwakuleli kanti ama-social media companies athi abhekana nebulukhuni kulandzeleka ukuthi avale ama-accounts aloyo lobeka ngumengameli yemelika Donald Trump eminyakeni lophelile.
1 year after supporters of President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol, the former president is still not permitted to use Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, the digital stages where he directly spoke to millions of followers.
It's a situation very, very bad for this country, very bad for the world. If they can do it to me, they can do it to anyone.
January 6th was certainly a moment of reckoning for the social media platforms.
Trump was accused of using the platforms to stoke the riot. His suspension is a stark reminder of the power social media companies have over political leaders who run afoul of their rules. But despite the ban, after January 6th, social media companies came under intense fire from critics who said the suspension was too late, coming years after tolerating Trump's violations of the company's rules. For their part, technology companies have said they are constantly working to make their services safer. Twitter's former CEO said at a congressional hearing that Twitter did bear some responsibility for disseminating disinformation that led to January 6th, but pointed to the larger culture.
But you also have to take into consideration a broader ecosystem. It's not just about the technology platforms we use.
There have been some changes. Twitter enacted a 5-strike policy on misinformation about COVID-19. Facebook now applies its content moderation rules to politicians, a group it had shielded in the past. But the changes strike some experts as small.
Whether or not they've actually changed how they think about their products and their algorithms and the core business models, that I think is less so. That I think is they still continue to play a bit of whack-a-mole.
Looking out to elections this year, the potential remains that social media could lead to more unrest, observers say.
We really need to start planning now for all those things. And I haven't necessarily seen what I would like to see from the companies around what they're doing.
Some critics point to the company's way of making money, advertising, and how the firms have created algorithms that highlight extreme content that is more engaging.
A lot of these platforms have made tweaks around the edges, but at the end of the day, it's about the business model. These platforms are fundamentally designed to elevate, amplify, proliferate the most problematic things on the platform, things like election lies, racial violence.
Whistleblower leaks at Facebook showed how some of these problems are familiar to company executives. In the coming year, lawmakers could try to force the companies to make bigger changes to policing controversial content and being more transparent about what they are doing.
Nanome umkhuhlane COVID-19 wenda umonakalo lomkhulu emhlabeni kanjalo nekuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu climate change kusasengiyo inkinga lebhekene nemhlaba wonke.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. do solemnly swear.
President Joe Biden's inauguration in January marked a reversal in the U.S. approach to climate change after 4 years of inaction from the Trump administration.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer.
Biden set a target to cut greenhouse gases in half by 2030 and started taking steps to help reach it, says Columbia University law professor Michael Girard.
The Biden administration has rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, has resumed acting on climate change, and Congress has just appropriated a lot of money to go to energy infrastructure, and the U.S. Is back.
But there's still a gap between the aspiration and the real actions that have been realized within this first year.
Cletus says Biden has struggled to get the biggest parts of his climate agenda through Congress and allowed fossil fuel development to continue. Meanwhile, the planet kept warming. 2021 will likely join the last 6 years as the hottest on record. Record-breaking heat and drought sparked wildfires from Siberia to the American West and Canada. Floods killed hundreds in China and scoured Germany. Extreme events are becoming the norm, says Center for Strategic and International Studies analyst Joseph Mikett.
We need to get ready for these effects to come in. They're going to be damaging. If we do our best, they will be manageable, but we need to be ready for them, and we're going to see more and more.
But scientists warn the world is failing to meet the threat. After a brief dip from the COVID-19 pandemic, greenhouse gas emissions came roaring back in 2021. Observers were pessimistic going into November's climate summit in Glasgow.
It is so decided.
But countries pledged significant emissions cuts, and wealthier nations agreed to increase climate funding to lower-income countries, notes the World Resources Institute's Helen Mountford.
We did see a lot more progress than many of us thought was ever possible. But at the same time, the second truth is that we just accomplished nowhere near enough given the scale of the challenge and how quickly we need to be moving.
The planet is still on track for devastating levels of warming. Countries committed to come back next year with stronger pledges, Summit President Alok Sharma said.
Whilst we have reached, I do believe, a historic agreement, what this will be judged on is not just the fact that countries have signed up, but it will be judged on whether they meet and deliver on the commitments.
Disasters will keep intensifying as the Earth heats up, scientists say, but it's up to us to decide how bad we let things get.
Kansela sachubeka netindzaba tetfu tangaphandle kwakuleli kunekukhatsateka kokuthi ema-ice noma ke ema-glaciers ancibilika ngelizinga lelisetulu.
6 glaciers in the Himalayas have nearly vanished since 1980, according to satellite data mapping, and researchers say hundreds of glaciers in the region are melting, all part of the impact of a warming planet.
Every year you go to a glacier, we are seeing on an average almost a meter of thickness decrease in the glaciers. So that gives you an idea about the state and the status of the glacier melting in Jammu Kashmir.
In the Himalayan region, over 14,000 small and large alpine glaciers have been identified, including those in India and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. Some of the region's biggest glaciers can be found in areas between northeastern India and Afghanistan.
We are seeing glaciers melt very fast, and the way they melt is such that we can't estimate how long they will last. We can't guess how much water will flow into our rivers in the next 5 to 20 years, so if this continues, I can see conflicts and disputes in the future between Pakistan and India over water shortages.
Shifts in ice and glacier reserves have already had an impact on agriculture. Farmers in Indian-administered Kashmir are turning paddy fields into apple orchards.
There is a problem of water in the land. The crop is not growing properly. Pollution has increased. There was snow on the mountains. It was slowly melting. The annual paddy crop suffered a loss of 50%.
Local agriculture sustains the bulk of India's and Pakistan's populations, and the two nations have a long history of disagreements over water management. Those disagreements, experts say, will intensify as the glaciers disappear.
If the two countries don't stop fighting, not only will the disputes increase as we can already foresee, but also our two nations' water sustainability will also be impacted. I think we've reached a very interesting point here that not only do the two countries need to stop fighting for ethical and human rights reasons, but also because of environmental reasons.
And South Asia is particularly vulnerable to climate change. Over the next 30 years, if nothing is done, researchers predict water shortages, drought, and rising sea levels could create some 60 million climate refugees in South Asia.
Siqhubekela eveni lasemelika mengameli Joe Biden nakangena ehhovisini wangena nemlayeto ukuthi America is back. Asesibukana kumbiko kubuka ukuthi ingabe usebenze kanjani kulomnyaka wa 2021.
It's been quite a year in U.S. foreign policy, with the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in August widely seen as the biggest failure of President Joe Biden's first year in office.
Terrorism has intensified, and the Taliban takeover has led to sanctions that have put Afghanistan in a position where it has an acute humanitarian crisis that could well lead to mass famine. And I think that this very precipitate, chaotic U.S. withdrawal is seen as linked to those outcomes.
The withdrawal is in line with the administration's goal to decrease military engagement in the Middle East. But challenges remain, including existing tensions between Israelis and Palestinians and the stalled effort to rescue the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal with world powers that the Trump administration withdrew from in 2018. Still, following years of America First under former President Donald Trump, Biden's message is that America is back.
We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones, whether through changes to territory by force, economic coercion, technical exploitation, or disinformation. But we're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks.
But Biden has drawn fault lines, what he calls the struggle between democracies and autocracies. He rallied more than 100 countries at a virtual summit for democracy in December, excluding Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he met virtually on separate occasions, reinforcing a key theme in his foreign policy doctrine.
Global cooperation around complex issues like the environment and pandemics that require cooperation with China, that require cooperation with Russia. But on the other hand, also trying to keep on this theme of the United States will cooperate with democracies. The United States is a democratic nation, and the United States does see an authoritarian challenge as a significant challenge.
China, now a major adversary in military might and geopolitical influence, is Biden's foreign policy priority. But Russia, another rival, is not staying on the sidelines, mobilizing tens of thousands of troops along the Ukrainian border.
Russia is not a solved problem. It's still a major actor that has interests that are divergent with the United States and our European allies. And so it really can't be put in a box. I think what we're seeing here is some behavior from the Russian Federation to remind the United States that it's still there, it still has interests that it wants to pursue, and that those interests can't be ignored.
Another unsolved problem is North Korea, where the administration is unwilling to cut a deal unless Kim Jong-un commits to winding down his nuclear weapons program.
Kanti sifundza sase-Europe sesivete kukhatsateka kwaso kokuthi tinombolo tebakhoseli letisuka e-Middle East kanye nase-Africa titawunyuka ngemnyaka lotako.
Winter's sub-zero temperatures have not stopped the migrants at Poland's border. This group was rescued from a swamp by Polish soldiers. Medics said they were lucky to survive. Europe has long experienced migrant crises, but the emergency on Poland's border was manufactured, say analysts, with the weaponizing of migrants by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko.
In order to retaliate on the support for his political opponents by the EU countries, and also for the sanctions, the set of sanctions that were put by the EU on Belarus in the aftermath of the rigged elections.
Lukashenko relaxed visa restrictions for migrants from the Middle East and South Asia, including Iraq, Syria and Iran. Europe accused Lukashenko of luring them to Belarus and then directing or even ferrying them to the EU border. Lukashenko denies creating the crisis. The first migrants crossed into Lithuania in July. By August, far greater numbers were gathering on the Polish frontier. Polish authorities moved quickly to reinforce the border, imposing a state of emergency and blocking access to journalists and aid groups. The migrants seeking asylum in Poland were pushed back in often violent confrontations. Belarusian soldiers then forced the migrants back to the frontier. Many reported being beaten and threatened, with nowhere to go.
As you see, everybody almost dying of the cold, hunger and everything.
Poland accused Belarus of conducting a hybrid war.
We know this is a fully planned operation which aims to disrupt the sovereignty of our country. Lukashenko's regime uses civilians as weapons of a hybrid war.
Poland passed emergency laws to deal with the crisis.
It gave priority of pushing people to the border, so the practice of pushbacks, over recognizing their asylum claims. On the one hand, Europe seems to be the beacon of human rights and democracy, and on the other hand, it is engaging in those very legally dubious practices.
Europe imposed further sanctions on Belarus. Meanwhile, Russia gave its support to President Lukashenko, blaming Europe for the humanitarian crisis. With the route to Europe effectively closed, the flow of migrants has slowed. Hundreds have been flown back to their home countries. But analysts believe the crisis is far from over.
Lukashenko will resort to the strategies that worked throughout the summer and autumn of smaller groups of people being pushed across the green borders.
Geopolitical tensions and migrant pressures have converged to form a new crisis on Europe's eastern flank that looks set to continue into 2022.
It's 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. Sadiphetha lapho tindzaba tetfu letibuya ngaphandle kwakuleli kanti sesivele siyanivalelisa sibangakhola ukuthi sonhle nathi lo mhla kungolesithathu sesime ukuthina banelisuku loluhle nalo liphephile nisale kahle.